This is going to be it's a talk on a very serious subject, and most of my introduction is going to be relatively serious. But when I saw Rohini's title, which I didn't till 2 or 3 days ago, a few days ago when the poster came, I thought I must start with a humorous anecdote. I was in London recently, and as always, when I'm in London, I go to work at the British Library, where they have a vast collection of primary archival materials on different aspects of Indian history. And I had a research query, so I was waiting for the research librarian, and I had to wait a very long time because he was on the phone. And he was on the phone, it became apparent, to someone who was British. And with Brexit looming, and Britain leaving the European Union, the person on the other side of the phone wanted to find a way of having a second citizenship. Now, from the conversation, I was only hearing the research librarian side of it, but he was saying, your grandfather was in the British Army? Yes. And you think he was of Irish origin? And you think he died in India in 1859? And you think we might have his birth certificate? So prove your grandfather is Indian. Now, there's some happy, contented British people who are very keen to prove their grandfather was born in India so that they could get an EU passport. That's very different from what is happening in Assam today and what we'll hear from Rohini. Now, Rohini herself, as some of you know, is a native of this city. She studied here and in Chennai and then in Colombia. And she's worked for a wide variety of press outlets. I mean, she's worked for a daily newspaper, The Hindu, The Economic Times. She's worked for a weekly, Tehelka. She's been in television. For the last few years, she's joined my club, which is of self-employed stroke unemployed freelancers living by their wits, such as they are. Her work is notable for its depth, its diversity, and its courage, all three characteristics of which are, of course, best exemplified in her award-winning work, The Seasons of Trouble, which is about the civil war in Sri Lanka and the lives of people caught in that civil war. Now, maybe later on in the discussion or in my concluding remarks, I may say something about Sri Lanka. But there are some interesting parallels, or one would say disturbing parallels between what is happening in Assam and what has happened in Sri Lanka from the 1960s onwards. You know, Sri Lanka, many of you would have been to Sri Lanka, and I have been over the last 20 years several times. And it struck me that had there not been a civil war in Sri Lanka, it's possible that Colombo rather than Bangalore would have been the software capital of South Asia. And I don't say this facetiously. I mean, it's an extraordinary country with very high social indicators, women's emancipation, health, education, infrastructure. And had it not been for the civil war, perhaps they would have been much better off economically, socially, politically, spiritually than they are now. And of course, one cause of the Sri Lankan Civil War, indeed the most important cause of the Sri Lankan Civil War, was this paranoid kind of nationalism which defined citizenship on the basis of language and religion, and which is where we may be headed towards, or which you could even see Assam as really the cat's paw, the front edge of that kind of nationalism. Finally, let me say a little bit about the importance of Rohini's work and the work of people like Rohini. I am conventionally known as a historian. I have never taken a history degree in my life. My degrees are in economics and sociology, and I was doing a PhD in sociology. And the difference between sociologists and historians is that sociologists work in the field and historians work in the archive. And I started working in the field, and I found it too difficult for me. And I became a historian because documents don't answer back. And it's ever since I've had enormous admiration for anthropologists like Nandini Sundar and Alpa Shah who work in the field, and for field reporters like Rohini Mohan. And of course, it's not merely a personal admiration. It's a kind of, it's an admiration also born out of the sense that that is really fact-based, detailed reporting is what is increasingly being evacuated from Indian journalism. I mean, television is the most guilty party here, and I haven't talked to Rohini about this, but perhaps she joined television thinking it'd be something else than what it turned out to be. You know, it's all about anger and studio reports, and there's no money, no interest, no desire for people who run our TV studios to actually do field reports. And that really is the importance of Rohini's work, and like the rest of you, I can't wait to hear her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Ram, for that wonderful introduction. I was warned that I will start by blushing, but actually I feel vindicated in the madness that a lot of journalists like me kind of swear by, which is to simply go on the field and stay there for an unnecessarily long time, speaking to more people than you can write about, and kind of researching till you have almost confirmed some of your fears, which is what happened actually for me when I was reporting on Assam, which I have done in the last 2 years. So let me just go straight there. So let's go to the Northeast first. So when it was one of my earliest visits, I'd gone there to cover the floods, but after that, when I went in 2018, it was to cover the process around the National Register of Citizens, which is what we're going to talk about today. But what I first felt was the number of languages that I didn't know. I'm usually quite comfortable in the South. I can speak almost all the languages that are spoken here. But then that kind of, the number of languages, the diversity, the kind of food, all the fish and the rice, I was so happy to be there. But it was during this time that the state was facing one of its most divisive processes, and everybody was involved. We might feel like only those that were targeted were involved, but the entire population of Assam was involved in actually getting into this register. So one of the first people that I met was Shahnawaz, who's the man in the green t-shirt. And he's from Barpeta, which is in Assam. It's a district known for being largely a Muslim and a Bengali-speaking dominant district. This is his family. The older man sitting down is his father, who was once the Panchayat president. The man in the banyan is his older brother, who will soon join the police. He has another brother who runs a pharmacy, another brother who runs a grocery shop, two sisters who've done their graduation. One of them has done her 10th standard. They're married. They live in different cities. As soon as I went to their house, they gave me some chai, sat me down, and before we could begin the conversation, Shahnawaz said, "Before we have a conversation, let me show you some evidence." And in the middle of their courtyard, they put out this plastic table and chairs around it and brought out fraying documents, yellowing paper from the plastic, the ubiquitous plastic covers that people carry around in our country for their most important things. And when they were showing me, they showed me lists, electoral lists, like voter lists that went back up to their grandfather, great-grandfather, their grandmother's on it, brother, sister, everyone's on it. And then they showed me land documents from 1934, written in cursive handwriting of whoever was the colonial bureaucrat at that time. They showed me birth certificates of their sisters and two of the brothers, the younger brothers. They showed me driving licenses. One of them had a passport. And as they showed all of this, it seemed to be a paper trail of the life of an Indian family. And yet, they were petrified. They were really scared that they could lose their citizenship overnight. And this is something that people in Assam and now, I guess, across the country are fearing, lakhs of people, that overnight they might become stateless, that they might have taken something so for granted, and now it is being questioned, and they are scurrying around to find documents for that. And at this time, when I started doing this report, and everyone would take out all these papers and show it to me, I started wondering about my own family. What makes me Indian? Why? I mean, it's not something that I ever thought of before. You take it for granted. And as Ravi said earlier, I started to think, is it by birth? Is it because I'm born here? But it's not. Unlike the US, where you get citizenship if you're born there, it is not by birth. I find that it is for a variety of ways in which you can be Indian. It is by naturalization. You can marry and then apply. You can also, if you're born in a certain time, there are different slabs. It's a very complicated process, but it's not only by birth. But one of the primary things is that it is by descent. And that makes you kind of look at your family pictures a little more deeply and, look at your grandfather and sort of grandfather and grandmother and ask them, okay, do you have birth certificates? Do you have, land papers that go back all that way? It's the sort of thing that people in Assam have been doing for a long time. It sounds fun, and when I met the NRC coordinator who's just moved out to Madhya Pradesh, it was something that he said, it is bringing families together, that if there are like 90 people in a family, they will all come together, and we are bringing families together. But in fact, it is about asking the oldest member of your family, who's probably 95 or 100 or whatever, whether he has documents. In Assam, however, citizenship is is different from the rest of the country. It has a unique way of giving citizenship or if you are from Assam, there's a different way in which you become a citizen. And there is a history to this. It's a region that has seen waves of migration for centuries. And nearly everybody who now claims to be truly Assamese or truly from Assam most of them have come from Upper Asia, they've come from Burma, they've intermingled, the Bodos, the Mishing. There's a lot of communities that live there, and this is the variety that I found as soon as I entered there in the food and the languages. And then you find that this is something that some groups have managed to coexist and become, and have that sort of the pride of being from the land. And some groups, like the Bengali speaking, which is actually who are in a way the latest wave of migrants. And this happened, I guess, around the colonial times. There were people who, I'm just giving you a little bit of background in history. We will move to the reporting just after, because this is the background that I learned immediately, and everyone would give me a lecture on this. So I thought I should share that joy. So the Bengali-speaking migrants were invited wooed in some ways by the British with land, with jobs, to till the land, to cut forests, to clear forests, and to make farmland more productive. And since then, there has been, if you speak to the average Assamese today, there is a deep fear that they will express, some will not express, but some will express very vociferously, that the Bengalis are going to overtake us someday. And this comes from a fear of losing their own language, their own culture, but it also comes from a fight for a long time over resources, over land, over that the shrinking land space around the Brahmaputra, which is also constantly shifting. And this has caused agitations over the years. It peaked in the late 70s to the early 80s, which is called the Assam Agitation, where there was the All Assam Students Union, which led this against outsiders, which was largely defined. Nobody had to define it. Everyone knew within themselves that it meant Bengalis who were believed to be from Bangladesh. In their mind, they would have the picture of a Muslim, but it also acted out against Hindus who also live on both sides of the border. And this is a region whose borders have been redrawn repeatedly over time: Bengal, East Pakistan, then Bangladesh in 1971. And hordes of people have moved because of famine, because of borders changing, for livelihood, because of flood. And this agitation focused on throwing all of those people out. And one of the worst moments of that was in 1983, it was called the Nellie Massacre, where in one morning, 2,000 to 3,000 people were massacred, all of them Bengali-speaking Muslims who were accused to be illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. And after that, to kind of end that violence, then an accord was signed called the Assam Accord with then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, the head of the student union, who's a minister now, and the Assam government. So what they signed and said was that they set a deadline. That was where the deadline, and that connects us to the NRC today, the 1971, which was the cutoff. Anyone who could prove that they lived in the country, in Assam, before 1971, only they would be considered Indian. And 1971 is when, this date is one day before Bangladesh was created. And it also promised to preserve and protect Assamese identity. So this led governments after that, including Congress governments, to come up with several different ways. One of the most lasting being this system called the Foreigners Tribunals. They also had what they used to call people doubtful voters, which is put a D next to the names on the electoral list. For 10 years, people couldn't vote until they proved that they were Indian. There was also a border police that was set up. A border police, this border police of Assam is not on the border, which is another reality check I had by going on the ground. They have police stations in some districts inside villages, and they look at people who they suspect and file cases against them as illegals, even if they've lived there for a long time. They're not catching anybody on the border. And then the Foreigners Tribunals, where all of these cases go to get solved. And this is something that has lasted for decades, since the 80s. And the latest process is the NRC, which is the National Register of Citizens. This is a picture from last July when people were going to check if their names were there in the draft list, which was released by the NRC authorities. The NRC was actually decided upon during the Assam Accord, but why is it happening now? Was because there was a petition in the Supreme Court that asked for the Assam Accord to be implemented. And then Ranjan Gogoi, who also hails from Assam, was a judge on that. And in 2012, a judgment was passed that said that this process has to start. And in 2015, that gave the impetus to the NRC process. And in 2015 onwards, this started. So what the NRC process is, so this is about 3.3 crore people applied to get into the NRC, so every person who lived in Assam. And now in August, which is the latest list that came out, and this is supposed to be the final list, 19 lakh people were not included. And that means that these 19 lakh people are not considered Indian citizens. So what it does now is this sort of, the NRC has, the NRC was supposed to be the solution to all of these years of strife. It was expected to finally settle the foreigner issue, the illegal immigration, all the fears and all the adjustments that people felt they had to make and didn't want to. It was supposed to end it. But what it has done actually over since 2015, and much more so in the last 2 years, is rekindle all those divides of identity, of fears, and this has led to lakhs of people facing statelessness, and statelessness means not having most of your rights, which means you belong nowhere. And I'll explain later on why it's stateless, and if we are accusing them of being Bangladeshi, why are we thinking they're stateless? So let me go to some of the people that I met while reporting on this. This family, they're called the RTIs, and this is just outside Guwahati in a district called Kamrup. And what is happening right now is that all of them are looking for a single land document that connects 5 brothers. One brother is missing here. That connects 5 brothers because all of them will inherit that land, have inherited that land. And as you know, in India, families hold land together. So there was sudden panic because they couldn't find it. All of them have this one copy, which they have to submit. So how the NRC works is that there are 2 sets of documents that you have to submit, where the first is called a list A or something, where you have to prove that somebody in your ancestor lived in Assam before 1971. One of the most powerful documents is a land document, which the bureaucracy believes is hard to fake. Or you can show some other document as well. But that's not enough. You have to then show another set of documents to prove that you are connected to that old man or old woman. And how do you show that? You have to show another set of documents, which is your birth certificate, which may mention your father, and then your father's birth certificate, which may mention his grandfather, and then your grandfather's birth certificate, which may mention his father. So you have to show all of these documents, and you can imagine we all have Indian government documents. You can imagine the array of mistakes and the array of missing links that can happen in just the 3 generation documents that I mentioned. But you have to prove repeatedly not only that you're connected. So one document is not enough. One document is bolstered by one more document. So you have to present all of this, and further back you go, the harder it is to find documents. Maybe today, and there was a survey done by UNICEF, I think 4 years ago, that found that in that year, just 4 years ago, only 54% of people registered their births in India. So this doesn't give us a great sense of how actually whether people have documents or not. So when they thought that they lost that document, it was panic. Some of these people did not make it because they would not find that document. This is Delwara Begum, another lady that I met who lived in what is called it's spelled Char, but the Assamese people say Sor, which is a river island that keeps shifting over several years on the Brahmaputra. And what she's showing is what is called a Gaon Bura certificate, which is the certificate that the local panchayat man, who's not actually the elected panchayat leader, but the kind of community leader, he comes under the district collectorate. He gives this document saying that, I know this lady. And why does she need this document? This is the single document she has. This is the only document she has. A lot of people and not just Muslim, a lot of people living in poverty, a lot of people even we would know are let me tell you about Delawara. She got married before she turned 18. She never went to school. She's around 60 years old, I think. And so she never went to school. She got married before she turned 18. And it was only, I think, around the age of 24 that she voted for the first time. And so the first time she appeared in any Indian government document with her husband's name. So there is no document, and that's of no use for the NRC or any citizenship document, because there is no document that shows her with her father's name. So the only way in which she can prove that is something that the NRC developed, which is by going to somebody who may know her, which is the panchayat head of the village she currently lives in, which is where she's married into, and the panchayat head from the previous village where she grew up, will say, okay, I know that she is the fifth daughter of Mr. Muhammad Ali or whatever, and I knew her, she grew up here, and then the other person says she came from that village, she hails from that village, which is her father's village. So these two documents will be given. These are called the Gaon Bura certificates. Lakhs of women only had this document to give, and they did give it. But last year, 2 months before the final list of the second final list of the NRC came out, the NRC coordinator said that these documents that the women have submitted were weak documents. So just 2 months before, so since 2015 they were submitting this, and just 2 months before, all of the people who submitted this were subjected to, again, another scrutiny by the whoever the local officer is in the village, and he will look at the document and determine whether he believes it to be true or not. And this is supposed to be an extremely objective, the NRC calls this to be technical, objective, untouched by human hands. But as soon as a person looks at a document and has the power to decide, and given the history that I told you about, the deep biases that are there, in most of the districts where people believe there are illegal immigrants, women from those districts in mass numbers did not make it to the NRC. And this is, there was a survey, again, a study done by some local NGOs in Assam, and they found that in the previous list, in the last year's list, 54% or 54 or 56% women didn't make it because 54% of women who submitted this document didn't make it because it was considered weak. And this happened in 2 months before the list. What you're seeing here is it's actually a document that is held by a family that has been displaced by floods 9 times in their life. And what they have is the relief, that is the compensation that the government has given one of those times for them because they lost their house, their farm, and everything. I'm not only showing this to show that things can be lost in floods and become like this. I'm also showing this to show that a lot of people who are flood victims were people who've moved from place to place, and as soon as there is a new village in which they have suddenly set up a hut, there are large numbers of people who said that these were illegal immigrants who've just come from Bangladesh. Especially if they're wearing a burqa, if they look really Muslim, then they're believed to be from Assam because they've suddenly kahin se tapke. but they have actually moved because of floods, and they've moved and they've started living in a new village. And somebody who has actually moved and been displaced by floods 9 times in their lives has to have documents to show that whole journey of displacement. And only then, because that kind of certificate that somebody gives, nobody knows how many villages you moved to because of flood. And you may have moved in between to Bangalore to work for a year and then gone back. You have to have all of those documents. So a large number of people, again, who didn't make the NRC were flood victims. Because, as you may know, Assam faces floods nearly twice a year. For the last 2 decades, it's been going on. So it's not just, we may feel like the most poor, desperate, and, women, the most vulnerable people are the ones who suffer, who are struggling to prove their citizenship. But no, these are 2 people. One is in the Air Force and one is in the Army. I personally met 15 people who were in the armed forces who didn't make it. There were journalists, very well-to-do academics who didn't make it. There are children whose parents made it, but they are under the age of 10 and they didn't make it into the NRC. And then that's a picture of an entire village that turned up. I went to talk to one lady, the lady in the orange sari in the middle. As I was talking to her, the entire village turned up. So the whole village was not included in the NRC. I'm showing this picture again to move to a sort of idea that the NRC, to kind of debunk the idea that the NRC stands on its own. These processes that I talked about, that like the Foreigners Tribunal, it all bleeds into the NRC. Because everyone, this is another group that didn't make it to the NRC, is anyone who faces trial in any of the other systems, when they apply to the NRC, when your application is not even processed. So it is not replacing another process. It is just another new one. So this is their documents, and these are their brothers. And this was the reason, when they were not included in the NRC, the entire family went repeatedly to the office to ask why, because they had the documents, and they were most proud that they had a land document. It says declared foreigner, descendant, and therefore declared same ditto. The person on top, document is fine, but because he is this person's brother, he is not included in the NRC. This Foreigners Tribunals feels like something, when I started reporting there, I thought NRC was the main thing to do. But as people started using these words, this doubtful voter, hum D hai, hum D nahi hai. I don't know Assamese or Bengali, so I would speak to them in Hindi or with the translator. And they would keep mentioning this D, or that hum declare hai, hum Indian hai, hum declare Indian hai, hum not foreigner hai. It was, these words were not there in the NRC lexicon, right? So then when I actually asked them, many of them were already in this whole process of the Foreigners Tribunals. So why it is relevant today, and why I spent the last year reporting about the Foreigners Tribunals, was it's one of the most arbitrary, opaque, and biased systems of determining whether a person is Indian or not. And it is relevant today because anyone, those 19 lakhs people who did not make it to the NRC, will be facing the Foreigners Tribunal now. And this wasn't said 2 years ago or in 2015 when the NRC was announced. It is only said now, after the final list came out, that everyone must face the Foreigners Tribunal. And this is extremely scary, because it was to replace this horrible process that the NRC was set up. And now that the NRC has failed, they have the Foreigners Tribunal. It was one of the most confusing bureaucratic systems that I have encountered, and it was so confusing that I did this flowchart for myself. It shows, somehow everyone ends up in a detention camp. So there's a process going on from 1997, which is the Foreigners Tribunal, and then you have the Nrc process, which if you're rejected from, you go into the Foreigners Tribunal. If you're declared not a foreigner, that is, after you go through that process, you submit documents, where basically how it happens is all those police, border police, what they do, once they doubt that you are a foreigner, they file a notice against you. They send it to your house. They're supposed to come to your house and give you a chance to explain yourself and show documents. Or if you don't have it immediately, come to the police station and show. I have found that this does not happen. Maybe it happens in rare cases. I never encountered any, and nor did any journalist that I talked to. So these people, what they do, then once you get that notice, it has a hearing date. And you have to go on that date to the local Foreigners Tribunal with all the documents that you have that can prove that you're Indian, and you have to explain yourself. Now, who is sitting in the tribunal? they're called tribunal members who are kind of sitting at the head of the tribunal. These, I believed, were judges with judicial background, but they're not. They're just lawyers with about 5 years of experience. And recently, even that has been reduced, and it can be any bureaucrat with 3 or 5 years of experience with no judicial background at all. And these are the people who will sit in the Foreigners Tribunal and decide your citizenship. And you will submit documents to them. These are some of the pictures I'll show you that I took in Foreigners Tribunal. This one is in Barpeta. This is another visual thing that reality check that I had. I thought it would be a courtroom. First of all, you get a reality check in a high court and a Supreme Court after you've grown up watching movies. And then you get this reality check where a tribunal is in this shape. We could have been proud of it if it was this kind of up and running sort of like shack, which was doing great work, but there's not much to be proud of this system. This is another tribunal which is in Boko. That is a gym equipment outside because it's just one room inside a gym. This is another one which is on the top floor of this shopping complex. There's a mobile repair shop at the bottom. So these tribunals, what they do is, so you have to go to the tribunal, show your documents, and when you show those documents, they look through it, you have a chance to give an oral submission, which the NRC doesn't have. So you can engage a lawyer if you want, and after looking through that, the judge will say whether you are a foreigner or not. The remarkable thing about this is that unlike the Indian law and judiciary that we know, where you are innocent until proven guilty, in the Foreigners Tribunal process, you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. So once the police accuses you of being a foreigner and having come from Bangladesh, they're supposed to have investigated, but I saw most of the investigation reports just blank, and just say that you've come from Mymensingh, which now is in Bangladesh, a district, and it used to be, it was a place where a lot of those indentured laborers came from. During the Raj. So this is all there is. And now with that, you have to prove. So you don't know what the allegations are against you, but you have to prove them wrong in the Foreigners Tribunal. So what I did was, when I saw that all of this was, I met several people. I met about 60 people in a few weeks. That were going through this process in the Foreigners Tribunal, and then and nearly all of them were explaining this process. They were saying it was biased. They were saying that they just did not have a fair chance to prove themselves. I found so many of them crying outside because their father, who was 70 years old, couldn't catch the bus on time to come to the hearing, and therefore that his daughter was declared a foreigner. So and at the same time, there was such a fog of, and there was such a fear about all of these people actually having been illegal immigrants. So how does one cut through all of this politics and this rhetoric? I thought that I should actually get some evidence, because when people say that someone is biased, I would take their word for it, but I also don't know. And especially when there was so much there was so much allegation, the reporter's mind, I don't know, I felt like I needed something more to convince people, because it can just be dismissed. Poor people saying repeatedly that I'm Indian was not working. What else can we offer to convince people? So I decided to actually file RTIs and ask all the 100 tribunals. There are 100 tribunals, sorry, I didn't mention that there are 100 tribunals in Assam. There were 36 until 2015, and after that it became 100. Now there will be 1,100. So these 100 tribunals, I filed RTIs asking all of them to submit copies of their judgments for the last 6 months. I filed this in January, so I asked for all copies of all the verdicts that they had passed from July 2018 to December 2018. I thought, let me see for myself if there is bias. Of 100, most of them denied information. They said they didn't have public information officers. They said that I should ask permission from the High Court. Actually, I don't have to. They said they were exempt from RTI. They are not. They said that I had not paid the RTI application fee, which I had. They said they didn't have enough resources to give me the documents, and they didn't have scanning equipment. They should have had it. And all of these things. I filed some first appeals. People called me and shouted at me in Assamese. But at the same time, I got documents from 6 Foreigners Tribunals. And this is the first time we are seeing this many documents. And I was able to analyze over 500 documents, over 500 verdicts to see if there is bias. What is actually happening there? So this is one of those replies that came, and an example of that is this sort of thing. So one of the first documents that I got and read, I actually looked at and marked this, because what it says is that somebody's father is Badr Ali, and whether Badruddin and Badr Ali are the same person. There is a panchayat head who has said, yes, they are the same person, and yet it says, unfortunately, some Xerox copies were there, and those documents, it says Badr Ali sometimes. This person lost his citizenship. This person was declared a foreigner based on spelling mistakes. They also told me that when they go, and I saw this myself, when people would go to get a document, because there has been a lot of documents that people have been trying to get, attested, notarized, and all of that. Imagine the amount of money people spend on this. When they actually go and ask them, and they say, okay, what is your name? If you said your name was Badr Ali, they would write MD Badr Ali, Muhammad. That was just added. He never said it. And I looked at lots of documents which the Foreigners Tribunal gave me, where all Muslim names had an MD in front of it. And then later this person has to prove that I am actually Muhammad Badr Ali, when you didn't, because now there's a Muhammad in one of your documents. They also said that there were there were confusions around names, such as, because if it was a Hindu bureaucrat, he would believe that your name, if you had if you had Uddin, for them they said Uddin, that's my name, Badruddin. So they said, you don't have a surname, I'll write Ali or something else. Or they would say that, why is your surname Ali and your son's surname Ahmad? Shouldn't he also be an Ali? But they don't follow this same naming system, which people may believe is caste-based or whatever. And as South Indians, I'm sure we understand this. We don't have surnames. So people believe, so there are myriad reasons why your name can go wrong, but you lose citizenship based on this. So what I found from the data, that all the documents that I looked at and read through in extremely depressing detail, was that 82% of those orders were of people who were declared foreigners. So of the 500 and over, 82% were declared foreigners. I myself met personally 113 of them. I went and found them in their villages to see what language, because by their name, you can't know 100% what language they speak. And because people were accusing that they were targeting, this process was targeting Bengalis, I wanted to know whether that's true or not. So I met 113 people. They were all Bengali speakers. Of all those cases, 89% were cases against Muslims. 9 of 10 of those people who faced cases, Muslims, were declared foreigners. 4 of 10 were Hindus. 78% of the people who were declared foreigners didn't even face trial, which meant that they were declared foreigners without them ever having known about it. There was a case, they didn't turn up in court because they probably didn't know. There were many cases which in the documents it said, in the judgments it said, the police said that the person is absconding, but I have myself found many of them in their villages. I found at least 15 of them in one village who were said to be absconding, and they didn't know that they were declared foreigners, and they were right there in their house, and they hadn't changed their house at all. And they'd not been to court, they'd not got the notice, but they were declared foreigners. And 2 of them that I met, when I went to their house, the accused person was their husband. I met those women, and they were already in detention camp. So, and also many of the people that I looked at, many of the cases were second cases. You've already proved to be foreigner, to be Indian, and yet again you face another case accusing you to be foreigner. You have to go through the whole process again. And therefore, this was also shocking to me, because unlike the Indian judiciary and the Indian law that we know, you can't face trial for the same, you can't be accused of the same crime twice, but here you can any number of times. One of those people was this lady who I met her during Ramzan, and she in Kamrup, and she told me that she was going through a case. But actually, why I went to her house, I found her out and went to her house, was because I had a document which said that she was declared foreigner. It was when she met me that she found out that she was declared foreigner. She didn't know that. There are several accusations against the Foreigners Tribunals, and it's remarkable how, when you look at the documents, they are even more horrifying than the accusations, the truth. This is a performance appraisal sheet of this is also got through RTIs. It is also part of an affidavit in a case where people who were these Foreigners Tribunal heads who filed against who filed a case in the High Court of Assam, Guwahati against wrongful termination. What you're seeing here is, they record how many cases, this is 2017, how many cases did you look at, how many trials did you conduct, how many cases did you declare foreigners. And the ones I've marked in red are all the people who got fired because they declared under 10% of the cases that they looked at as foreigners, which meant that the rest, they made a lot of people, too many people Indians. A lot of the Foreigner Tribunal heads that I also met and spoke to, interviewed, told me that they felt pressure from the government to declare more people foreigners. Since the 80s, 1.71 lakh people have been declared foreigners, and there's been a sharp increase since 2009. Almost half of them have been declared since 2009, and many, many more of them since 2016. And this is a pressure that they have faced. They didn't say that there was any direct order that they had to declare a lot of people. They weren't given targets, but there was an effective target. If you were fired from a contractual job, which gave you 1 lakh rupees of salary a month, if you were fired from it because you didn't declare enough people foreigners. And what happens if you're a foreigner, if you're declared a foreigner, is that at the end of that judgment, a lot of lawyers told me that they would ask their client not to come to the court, to the tribunal, because as soon as, if you are declared foreigner, the border police is there and they'll detain you immediately. So there are 6 detention camps in Assam, and all of them are in district jails. They're not separate. There is one for women in Kokrajhar. And what happens is that you are immediately taken away. You've lost basically all your citizenship rights, all your rights. They take you right from the court. So this family, the man in the pink t-shirt is Dilip Biswas, and the man in the pink t-shirt is Dilip Biswas. Those are his 2 daughters, and that's his wife at the back. 9 years ago, the whole family was called to the police station, and the border police told them that they were declared foreigner, and they were all taken to detention camp. I met them in January when they came out after 9 years in jail, those children included. They're holding a photo of how old they were when they were taken to detention camp. One was 9, another was 5. They spent 9 years in detention camp, and they were able to come out because a friend of theirs actually was able to get some money, a neighbor, and he went and appealed their case in the High Court. And the High Court said that they were wrongly declared foreigners. And it also said that 3 women, the mother and the 2 children, should have not even been taken to detention camp, because there was no case against them. There was no police report against them, so they never faced trial, and they shouldn't have been detained at all. Of course, there is no compensation for 9 years of your life lost and a lifetime of these children not going to school. So what we have in terms of numbers is stories like this in lakhs, right? And these numbers mean something when you know all of those years and that all of that money that you spend in actually proving yourself to be an Indian and not making it. So since the 80s, as I said, 1.17 lakh people have been declared foreigners, and at the moment 900 are in detention camps. And in March, Ranjan Gogoi, who was the Chief Justice of India then, he said that why are there only 900 people if we have declared so many people foreigner? They must be absconding, or they must be assimilating into society and voting. These are comments that he made which were not recorded, but there were people who did make records. Ranjan Gogoi is from Assam himself. I thought I'll end with kind of looking at certain perceptions that are really strong and they remain about the foreigners issue. And the first is that there are actually 50 lakh illegal immigrant Bangladeshis. And this is a number that has been bandied about for decades. And it remains in currency and in use because it has the power of fear. It scares you to imagine that there are this many people. It scares some people to imagine that there are this many people who've come across the border and are working here. and it seems like a big enough national security problem. But in fact, the NRC, the Foreigners Tribunal, the census, all of these are methods to actually count how many people might be illegal immigrants. And this 50 lakhs has no calculation, no basis. It finds its way even into a Supreme Court judgment because a governor once mentioned it. Politicians have mentioned it in parliament, in assembly. It has no meaning and no basis. And before I get to that one, the numbers that we do know, because we can only go by how many numbers, especially if it is a problem that we don't understand, when we need all of these processes to actually count how many illegal immigrants we have to look at what we do know. And one is that number of declared foreigners, which is 1.17 lakhs. Another number is the census number, the latest census, which we have, which said 1.72 lakh immigrants from Bangladesh lived in India. Another number is of the NRC, which is found 19 lakhs, and they are still under process. These are numbers we do know, and 50 lakhs is an unknown quantity. The other thing which I heard actually from a lot of activists and academics and liberals who also wrote reports about the NRC and the process that was going on, and first mentioned the connection with the Rohingyas and said that all of these people it's a very similar story. And it actually drew my attention to the issue because you're not looking at Assam a lot of times if you are living in Bangalore, but it made me look because it felt big enough. And it also, in that narrative was that only Muslims are targeted. But it turns out, and I have myself met, and now we know in the last 1 year that several Hindus are excluded, Bengali-speaking Hindus are excluded from the NRC and have also been declared foreigner by the Foreigners Tribunals. They continue to face discrimination in Assam. And this is actually a very inconvenient truth for the BJP, and this is why over the years they have started to kind of underplay the NRC. This is not a satisfying result for them that there are so many numbers of Hindus included. And there are some Hindus among them who believe that because the BJP is uncomfortable about them having been excluded, it will do something to get them out and somehow get them out of this problem. And this is very obvious when I went to cover the election in Assam. Many of them said that I know that, like one lady especially I remember, she said, I know that voting for the BJP is to push all us Bengali speaking people and my Muslim brothers into the well, but this is the only way I can get out of this problem is by voting for them, because maybe then they will get me out of this problem. It's a game that the BJP has understood, but it was a conundrum some months ago. They didn't know what to do about it. And this is one of the families that I met. This is Mr. Burman, and he's a school teacher, and he was one of the first Bengali Hindus that I met. His grandfather was a refugee from East Pakistan, and he had refugee documents, and his entire family and all those children who are in the picture were not in the NRC, and they were going to face the Foreigners Tribunals. And he was also one of those people who said that the only way to maybe get out of this problem is maybe through some solution that the BJP will come up with. So here is the thing about the BJP being pro-NRC, especially since our Home Minister Amit Shah has called the NRC a way to draw out termites, which are what he calls the illegal, the undocumented immigrants that are coming in. And these are ways that they batted for the NRC for so long, but in the last year you will see, and in Assam it is clearer than ever, that in the assembly there are BJP MLAs that are trying to underplay the NRC and discredit it. And it is one of the reasons I understand from speaking to the NRC coordinator, who has recently moved out to Madhya Pradesh. And he was the face of the NRC, and he complained of being harassed by the BJP and feeling threatened. And so he has left. Another person has been appointed. So the BJP being pro-NRC, it was until they realized that this system, which is supposed to be untouched by human hands, has actually led to their own constituency getting stuck. So, and this is one of their leading top leaders, Himanta Biswa Sarma, who earlier was in the Congress, and he is the finance minister, also the key person to expand the BJP's hold in Assam. He has said, I've lost all hope in NRC, and this he said on the day the list was coming out in August. And there are other ways that Delhi and Assam are going to find to oust foreigners. And there's many more to come. There's many more lists. Ranjan Gogoi has also recently, the former Chief Justice of India, has said that it is only one, it is a base document. Another thing that we've been promised, all the people who might feel that we don't want these illegals around, is that the illegal immigrants, will, once found out, will be deported. But the truth is that over many years, very few hundreds of Bangladeshis have been deported to Bangladesh, and most of them have been found at the border while crossing. What is the problem here is that there is no treaty or agreement that India has with Bangladesh to deport anybody who is sitting in detention camp or who is actually declared a foreigner. And how deportation works is if the receiving country accepts that the person you're going to send to them is from their country, which means they have to find some document or something in their, on their side that shows that this person, Delwara Begum, is actually used to live here some years ago, or her family used to live here, so you can send. And Bangladesh has also, the government has repeatedly said that this is India's internal problem. So right now it looks like most people will just be languishing in detention camp. And now we come to this part where we're all going to go and ask our grandparents for their documents about an NRC coming to the rest of India. And this is something that has been announced several times. It is on the top list of their of the president's the discussion, what the cabinet has to look at, all of this. But at the same time, it also is remarkably, I don't understand how this is going to happen, because the NRC is, for example, the cutoff, the 1971 cutoff, is so special to Assam and its own history. How will this be changed for the rest of the country? There is no answer. How will any of this happen? Do we all have to apply? So what does it mean for the census? What about the other processes in which we are counted? What does all of that mean? There was some talk about that converting into the census and all of that converting. Actually, that's the NRC, which is calling it, we're just saying it's NRC, but we are not going to introduce a process. And then later they said, there was actually a notification from the Ministry of Home Affairs that said all states should set up at least one detention center. And our state of Karnataka is the first one to do so. And this detention camp right now, it has nobody detained yet, but it has become this space which both satisfies the national narrative, but also threatens much more harassment for people who are believed to be illegal immigrants. How it works is that first, the Karnataka Home Minister said that we will implement the NRC. The Yadurappa also said that we will implement the NRC, but after that they turned around and said, no, actually there is no NRC, because as I said earlier, it is a uniquely Assamese process, and so how will they do it? So they said, no, we will just follow the Foreigners Registration Office, their FARAROs, whoever they identify as overstayers of visa, people who are illegal, we will put those people in this detention camp. So it's an old process with a new detention area. And right now it's not even clear whether they will file FIRs against people for illegal. How would they ask them apart from papers? I also know in Bangalore of families that, there have been people who are saying that their community or their building manager has called up the police and said, I think we have a lot of Bengali maids. Can you check if they're Bangladeshi? So a lot of interrogation is happening. There is no NRC, and it's very hard for NRC to come up in many other states. But every state is coming up with its own version. There's also Meghalaya, which is now saying every outsider has to register in a document. There is Haryana, which I understand is going to already set up Foreigners Tribunals, and I think Punjab as well, and UP. And all of this is underway. They're all coming up with some process that resembles and kind of rides on this anti-foreigner narrative. And now that is the meaning of the NRC, because as the BJP itself is dissing its process in Assam, which was supposed to be a model for the rest of the country, they are coming up with their own, as Himanta said, their own ways of interrogating and focusing on those people that it considers illegal. I thought I'd also end with some stories of hope. That this is a picture of Akram. He is consoling a woman whose husband, who is 96 years old, committed suicide after his name didn't enter the NRC. After the NRC official told him that it may not be included in the NRC. And he was guilty and ashamed, and that was something he told his wife, because he, being, 96, his grandchildren, his sons, his daughters, all of them would lose their citizenship, and he was deeply ashamed and he committed suicide. But there are people who are activists, social workers, people from the rest of the country who are going to Assam to help. There are young lawyers who are trying to see if they can draft petitions for people, and this is happening. And another story of hope there was, this is Dilip Biswas again, whose family spent its time in detention camp for 9 years. And next to him is his neighbor, who's Assamese. And they told me that unknown, that benefactor, the friend who filed the appeal for them after 9 years in the High Court and got them out, was this neighbor, who, after all of those years, and as the politics of exclusion and division started reaching its peak, he felt greatly ashamed that there was his neighbor who he had known growing up and who was worked in his fields, was sitting in detention camp, and he decided to gather some money and go and file this case for him. These are rare cases, but they are hopeful because they are silver linings, but unfortunately in a very dark cloud. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohini, for that very rich, insightful, and moving presentation. So I thought I'll just start with a couple of questions, then we can throw it open. The first is, as you rightly pointed out, it is a misconception that only Muslims have been excluded from the NRC. Of course, there are many Hindus, including some Assamese Hindus as well. And also, one should remind ourselves that there's a large indigenous Assamese Muslim community too, many of whose members, including a former chief minister's family and a former president's family, have been excluded. But having said that, I had a kind of an intriguing question that arose from one of your slides. You had a slide of the Foreigners Tribunal, a very chilling slide of those officials in the tribunal who are reckoned good if they are 30 or 40% or more, right? Now, if you look at the names, I just very quickly look at the names. Now, they all seem to be Assamese, upper caste, Hindu male names. There are one or two females, but they know Bodos. They probably know Assamese Muslims. So is it that it is also, I mean, this, of course, one can't extrapolate from a single slide, but is it the case, is there some malified selectivity in who is being appointed on those tribunals?
So there were, I did see names in the documents of some Bodo names, and there were a couple of Bengali names, Hindu names. I didn't see any. I saw Muslim names. I don't know if they're Assamese or Bengali. I saw a few, just a couple, and I met one who was Assamese Muslim, and he was actually a retired district judge. So we don't know all the numbers, and they're one-year contracts, so you can keep changing them. But from the conversations I had with some of these Bengalis and the Bodos and all of that, and the lawyer's perception is that those people are better, more willing to hear. But there were also some Assamese Foreigner Tribunal heads that they said were good and were strict, and strict was good by, in lawyer terms. But what I think is that the process of selection of the Foreigners Tribunals will tell us how much subjectivity there can be. So it is not a clean process. The way you get selected is by interview. So and earlier it was not, the High Court was not even involved. Earlier it was just the government that would do the interview and appoint you. So immediately there's a lot of bias, and there is definitely bias, as I showed in that slide, and there are many more like that. Definitely bias in reappointment and in firing. In the initial process, I'm sure it is the same. But we don't have proof except to show that the process is riddled with spots for any kind of subjectivity. Yeah, and they're paid by the Ministry of Home Affairs. They're paid by government. Yeah.
And certainly bias in terms of rewarding people who are more punitive and savage. Right.
Yes.
But the second question I have before I throw it open is a somewhat historical one. Sorry. Is a kind of historical one. You started with the ASU movement. Now, the ASU movement, an important plank was against illegal immigration that was believed to have come from Bangladesh, both Hindus and Muslims. I think, again, it's important to remind ourselves that there's a large indigenous Assamese Muslim community that was well integrated before all of this happened. So that was one plank. But there was another plank, which I think we should not forget, which was exploitation of the natural resources and labor of Assam by the rest of India and giving that they were a classic internal colony where their water, their forest, their oil, and their resources were being plundered. Now, is this part of the narrative at all nowadays, or has that been, it's just this paranoia about immigrants?
So in the conversations around the solution, now that all of these identifying processes of NRC has not worked out, and also you can't deport them, what are we going to do with them, that conversation is coming back. So in that you can see the solutions that are being suggested are, let us give them no right to buy land. Let us remove their right to vote, of course. Then let us remove whatever land they have should be redistributed already. So in this one can see that the old question of, where this, so again, but again, of course, it's being framed versus the Bengali, and that part of the accord and that conversation about protecting and preserving their identity.
Was the centre's responsibility for promoting development in Assam, balanced development?
No, that is not. I mean, they're saying, as part of this resurgent Northeast, what is it? It is all part of that, I think. But it is deeply focused, it is extremely focused on how do we get it back from this community, this group. There were times during the election, of course, there were demands for protection of, especially the Bodos. They were talking about forest rights. They were talking about getting land back that is not being used by corporations. There was conversations around that, and some of that was referred to in those parts, and those parts were where BJP won. So they did mention those, and they gave them, they said they will get more reservations, they will get, some of the pattas will be given to them. So they did bring those, but that remains, that is like a concern that is, limited to that. And that doesn't seem to inform the larger policy of the anti-immigrant, which is what is really, in a way, it is what is homogenizing this whole group. Everybody else, if you have internal differences, then you'd have the Bodos criticizing the Assamese, the Homes. But you don't want, when you don't want that, you just bring this conversation up again. Yeah. The hospital there, so they had some Tamil documents as well. But all of this must be translated and submit. When you're submitting your case in the tribunals, they must be translated. The NRC accepted them, I think, as is. But that's why this whole cycle of, you don't know for sure, so you'll go through that process. You are told, you have to notarize, you have to attest, you have to do all these things. So 3,000 rupees per document you will spend to make it into English, to get all those stamps. But any document that's coming out from the government was in English, yeah.
So when actually a document is being created, do these poor people actually know that there are mistakes being made in their
in the judgment and all that? No, they can't read it. No, they can't. Their lawyer has to tell them what it is. Many times when they would say why, when they declared foreigner, they don't know. They go by what the lawyer. Because in the tribunal, the conversation is happening in Assamese, not in English. So they kind of know but they don't tell them why I'm going to declare you or whether I'm going to declare you foreigner or Indian. And so they kind of guess by, going by that conversation they had in the court, if they've understood anything from that at all. But many times, like when I met them, I kind of read out and said, this is the reason, this document they said is false, and they would say, but I gave it, and, they don't know. Most of them don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, good.
Hi. Yeah, can you elaborate on the unofficial bureaucracy or the unofficial intermediaries that propped up this NRC system? You just mentioned the people who do the translation and all. Because there is a scope of arbitrariness in who becomes and who does not become a citizen, I'm sure there are ways through which there are like agents and all. So can you elaborate on that?
There are no agents in the court. There are only lawyers who can enter. And in the NRC, only NRC officials who are appointed by the government, by the NRC official coordinator, only they are involved. But there is a huge racket among lawyers and it's really, really heartbreaking because for something that would cost you, some lawyers charge 10 to 15,000 for the whole thing. There are lawyers who, as soon as they see that, acha, you have a pakka house or whatever, they have charged people lakhs. And even when they know that there is no chance, their documents are not clear or whatever, and even if they may not try very hard, or they just keep extracting more and more until that person just dumps that lawyer and goes to another lawyer. So there were huge, and I also, when I would ask people, okay, so you have this, where are your original documents? Because I wanted to see them before I knew whether this person, how to have that conversation, right? So I would look at their documents for 15 minutes and then have the conversation. Many of them didn't have their original documents because their lawyer has taken them and they haven't heard from the lawyer for like months. And they don't have a phone number for the lawyer. They don't know his name. They say some sahab or some one name they have. They don't have any way to contact him. They've disappeared with all their documents. There were people I met who had documents that were not even their own, because they couldn't read it, which also answers your question. When they went through the whole process, they thought, okay, I got all my documents. When I read them along with the person who was taking me there, we were shocked to find that each page is of a different person. They've just taken something from the Xerox shop or something and given it to this guy. And he didn't know until, it was 6 months since he got those, and he didn't know. And when we told him, he panicked, and then he was like, okay, can you tell me another lawyer? So it's a very common racket. There are people who are trying to study this in the university and all that to see this is like a whole new economy. I met people who didn't know what is a doubtful voter, and that person is representing, and she was explaining her client's case to me. She said, yeah, he was a D-voter, and then she was just out of law school. Okay, so, and she said he was a D-voter, and then that guy knew the word D-voter. We were talking in English, but he said, I'm not a D-voter, I got this police case against me, and she was just about to go into court to actually, argue his case. So it's, which is why, some months ago when I was talking to some lawyers in Bangalore, and many of them expressed interest to go there and see if they can help, because a lot of it is unfortunately intention. They are supposed to also get legal aid from the government, but there's some complexity about who the government believes is Indian feeling enough to get legal aid, right? Because if you're a foreigner, should you get legal aid? You should actually, but they will decide whether you get legal aid or not. And anyway, the amount is too little for the number of people that are involved.
So this very interesting question and your answer brings me back, just as an aside, to your work on Sri Lanka and the refugees fleeing. Maybe you should write a comparative essay on British bureaucracy versus post-colonial bureaucracy. I suspect the British bureaucracy may appear a little more compassionate. But
people will say that they left the problem for us to fix.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Ma'am, you just said that it is a misperception that only Muslims would be excluded. Amit Shah has made this statement a couple of times that first citizenship bill will come, then NRC will come. So the citizenship bill says that all the non-Muslims and non-Christians would be included despite of the fact that their history or their nationality or something. In Madhya Pradesh, BJP is spreading this message that all the Sindhis which have came from Pakistan, you all will come under you will all get the nationality. So at the end of the day, if citizenship will come before the NRC, then only Muslims would be excluded, don't you think?
Yeah, I don't know what is this before the NRC. The NRC is over, I think, but you're right. I didn't get into the Citizenship Amendment Bill, and that is their fix for this problem that Hindus are also included. Right, so this is an unhappy situation because the intention was to target, the constituency they believe will never vote for them, and let's throw them out. They are Bangladeshis. So yes, the Citizenship Amendment Bill will fix this apparently, because they are what it says. For those who don't know, it says anyone who is. It doesn't say that. It names all the communities except Muslims and says that those people can apply for Indian citizenship. And some of them can, if they can prove persecution. But if you're a Muslim and face persecution in any neighboring country, you will not. You don't have that opportunity. And India has not signed the Refugee Convention, doesn't have refugee laws, but this is the first thing where, so there was a lot of criticism in Assam, and there were massive protests. They could have lost elections, BJP could have lost elections based on this, because the Assamese people felt, Assamese Hindus and Muslim, everybody felt that we don't care whether whether they are Hindu or Muslim. We don't want any Bengalis, and the Citizenship Amendment Bill is a backward door into allowing Bengali Hindus to live among us, and we don't want that. But of course, the larger criticism, the primary criticism, it changes the whole, violates the constitutional nature of who is Indian, who deserves to be here, and how we determine who is persecuted or not. So that continues, and the Citizenship Amendment, the winter session has started. It's on top agenda. It will be represented in the Lok Sabha.
Thank you so much. That was a chilling presentation. I had two questions for you. One, you talked about women. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You talked about women who are, say, married to certain people, but they weren't able to prove documentation by themselves, right? And they were weak documents. So I was trying to understand, even if there's somebody who is not a citizen of India, who's married to a citizen of India, there is a way in which you can apply for citizenship, right? So I was trying to understand, how does this work in the whole NRC process? And two, what happens in these detention camps, especially when women and children are being held? Is it the same as, say, being languishing in jail? Or is there any other activities are they being put to? And how does this work with respect to India's obligations, under international law? So I'm trying to understand what do these different actors sort of think about? Is there any pressure on the state from international sources to, I don't know, because it all seems like ghastly.
So your first question, none of the ways in which one can naturalize and all that in the rest of the country, they don't apply in Assam right now. They could have at some point maybe, but right now, since the NRC comes, that is the primary way in which you establish citizenship. And even if your husband is Indian, it doesn't matter, because you have to prove that your ancestors' bloodline was Indian. Ideally, again, according to Indian law, you can show father or mother. You can show father's side or your mother's side. But again, by practice, I saw many documents, many of these tribunal orders that said, no, we can't accept your mother's documents, which was really shocking to me, again, because you're supposed to accept any parent. The thing is that in Indian citizenship is for anyone who, because it's by bloodline, neither of your parents, it's kind of by what it's not, right? Neither of your parents should be illegal immigrant. So both don't have to be Indian, but if they had a visa and they lived here and then you were born to them, that's okay. But again, none of this applies in Assam under the NRC. And under the NRC, you have to show your bloodline. Your second question about the detention camps, people under detention for being declared foreigners have none of the rights that prisoners have, actually. That even if you have committed murder, multiple murders, you have more rights than a person who's declared a foreigner. They are kept in the same jails, but they're kept separately. And they get food. They're not allowed to work. Very few of them, I think, out of the goodness of their heart, in some places, sometimes some jailers allow young children to go to the nearest primary school if there is one. Just for a few hours every day, they go to the government school and come back. But other than that, they don't have anything. So there is, the conditions are really squalid. I haven't been inside one because by the time I started reporting, they banned anybody from entering. But some people have, especially Harsh Mandar, who was supposed to go and analyze how it is for the National Human Rights Commission. And he came out with a horrifying report about the status of the detention camps. The jailers keep people in two groups, one as Bangladeshi, one as declared. So they have decided who they believe is really Bangladeshi, because those people have admitted, yes, I'm from Bangladesh. Many of them who are actually caught at the border, they are also kept there. And then there's other group of all these people who've come from this Foreigners Tribunal, who even the jailers are like, okay, they are actually from India, but they are declared, so we are keeping them here. Right? And they have no way to prove they don't have any documents. Of course, because you're taken straight, you don't have anything with you. You've gone with the clothes on your back. And so you're just kept there. I understand that, recently, in March, when Ranjan Gogoi made those statements about let's detain more, he also, the few days after that, there was another judgment where he said that anyone who's been in detention camp for more than 3 years, because it came out that so many people were there just languishing, they can come out, they can go back on bail, and they have to present every week or something. They have to go to the police station and show their documents and show that they're there. So some people managed to come out, but many people have died. Some people have committed suicide. Many people have died because of how sick they fell. And the stories that people I met who came out of detention camp, when I met them, they said that it was like all of you, सारे Indian थे हमारे आसपास, सारे Indian ही थे, because they share their stories. These are the stories they're sharing. And yeah, they said that it was like they kind of forget, your body just comes to a standstill. You don't do anything. You just sit there.
I have two kind of connected questions. One is, you mentioned that there is some little hope in terms of young lawyers who are trying to kind of, figure out, minuscule, vanishing modes of redressal. Is there anything concrete that you could possibly share? And secondly is that, from your perspective, what do you think the scenario is going to play out in Bengal? Because there the BJP is kind of pushing NRC as a big ticket thing to kind of come into power. And thirdly, this phrase that you said, that this process is untouched by human hands, I could not but think of, the other big mess of a process that is Aadhaar. And if you have any thoughts on Aadhaar and NRC, because I think, they are connected, or they could be potentially connected at some point.
Yeah, in fact, actually, the UIDAI is involved in the NRC process, because towards the end, when if this appeal process, when people in the last year, they were applying to re-enter the NRC with more documents. At that time, the UIDAI in all of those centers was collecting biometric data, and people started this rumor that went around that two rumors were there, exactly contradictory, that if they took biometric, iska matlab hai hum Indian hai, because Aadhaar to citizenship hai na, like that's a belief, another belief, although because the government makes you believe both, that it is proof of Indian and it is also not. And then there is the other rumor that if you have taken biometrics, that means you're a foreigner. So actually that man that I mentioned who committed suicide, they took his biometric, and that made him believe that he was a foreigner, and that's why he committed suicide. So the UIDA is involved, but other comments I would not talk about right now. We'll talk after. The other, what was your first question? About
Bengal.
Bengal, yeah. Bengal, I think Mamata Banerjee has said that she's going to open a detention camp, and so I don't know what's going on there. And it beats me how this can function there if you're looking to, many of the people who were able, people even who moved from Bengal to Assam, they struggled to even submit their Bengali documents because they were not being accepted. Because although they were from West Bengal, it was just suspected. Everyone from West Bengal is suspected. So, and they're all their documents until the court said they should take it. So I don't know, but it looks like, as I said, many states are coming up with their own way to kind of use this fertile ground of anti-immigrant. And I don't know why she has to set up a detention camp and who that is meant for. So yeah, that's the extent of my understanding on that issue. Second question was?
The
Legally,
lawyers,
first question,
brave lawyers who are.
So I think they're just figuring out, people are figuring out what to do. There are some people who are, I think, Teesta Setalvad, and there is another group that planning to file a petition in the Supreme Court after having analyzed more Foreigners Tribunal data, whatever they've been able to get, and to show that this process is messed up, and asking for, I don't know if it's a PIL or what kind of document what kind of petition that is underway. There are some people who are whoever's interested, they can go, and there are a few top lawyers who are known for helping, and also, unfortunately, they are not able to go to court anymore. One, because they can't do only pro bono cases, and two, because they are being identified now by the judges as being compassionate, and so they are losing their cases, and therefore now they have started to take the help of people. One of the biggest, most difficult things to do is to write the oral statement, the written statement, where people basically tell their life story. And they tell it in Bengali or Assamese, and so it helps if you know either of the languages. If you're either a law student or a lawyer, to go and help them have this conversation, ask the right questions, try to make them remember as much as possible. They may not remember when their child was born, but they remember that they may remember that it happened during the Great Flood. So you kind of have to figure out those things and understand that there are lawyers who are helping them write those things. To me, it seemed like actually like anthropology or something, you know, and you have to know a little bit and have those questions, because the better the story of your life and the more detail it has, the more believable it is for the judge, the tribunal member. Yeah, so these are the kinds of things that people are doing. Because also, if you have language difficulty, that is something that you can do.
You know, one of the, just observing it from the outside, one of the curious things has been the relatively muted response of the Bangladeshi government and political class. I mean, the language used by our Home Minister is truly awful. You know, termites, we're going to push them across the border, and there hasn't been much reaction. Now, has it been, is it because they know कि हमारे बस की नहीं है, we can't push them across? We'll have to have our fantasy detention camps where, you know, our chief justices will ask us to fill more and more and more, but they're not going to go to Bangladesh. I mean, it's rather puzzling. I mean, it's been truly offensive language used by top Indian government officials and ministers about a valued ally. You know, it's this the kind of language that is normally used about Pakistanis. It's being used about Bangladeshis. But the Bangladeshis haven't really reacted. I mean, do you have any?
I spoke to some people. There was a time, so when my article came out here, I was also shocked. As a journalist, I was shocked that there was no coverage on that side of it at all. There's no nearly no coverage.
Press.
Last year for sure. Okay. Yeah. So and because the Dhaka Tribune got in touch with me, and is it Dhaka Tribune? Yeah. Daily Star. Asked me whether they can republish one story that I did. Another paper, again, republished a recent story that I did on there. So I asked, like, aren't your reporters doing, or are you not publishing stuff that is, you know, your reporters will do here? And they said, so some conversation I had with journalists about their conversations with bureaucrats and diplomats said that they have had when they met, when the diplomats meet, on the side, they've had a conversation where they've said, we will stick to this line saying that it is India's internal matter, because they were discussing trade at the time. And they also had this, at that time, they also made this decision to send back the Rohingyas. India did. And then they were afraid that they will be sent to Bangladesh. So that was one agreement they had, that you don't send them here. So this is all I know about it. To me also it's really shocking. But they have started, I feel like they addressed it by simply saying this is India's issue. These are not Bangladeshis, is I think the underlying message in that, to me at least.
I think there's someone there at the back. Yeah.
Lived in Guwahati for like 3 years in the 80s. I lived in Guwahati for 3 years as a South Indian, my dad working there. My take on this whole thing is, right now, what I'm a little worried about is how the media is covering this and the West and everybody's seeing it. Granted that people are not being treated the way they should in a refugee camp and stuff, which is all, I think we all stand up for. But I think the reason we are here is years and decades of inaction. You know, when I was a school student, I knew there were huge amount of, from that time there have been demonstrations against immigration. This has been parked conveniently for decades, and today someone's trying to solve something, the Supreme Court's got involved. But I think a lot of us are ignoring the fact that the local populace has been frustrated with this issue for decades. And I think that story is not getting enough coverage, and I say this as a South Indian who lived there for 3 years as a young student.
I have a question to you, actually, so
Sure.
keep the mic for a sec. So when you're saying that this issue has been going on for a long time and it's in action, but while there are protests and that narrative has been there for a long time, do you know for sure that there has been immigration for a long time?
Absolutely.
How?
I know for
How
a
do you
fact because I lived in a home and I've been there 7 years back with my brother after 25 years. In the basement, the house where I lived, I mean, I can't give details since it's sensitive, is the student leader of ASU. One of the guys used to live there. He was the son of the landlord's son. And there was popular support for, across Assam for pushing back immigration, folks who have come in from Bangladesh. So for the Bangladesh government to pretend that there's an India internal issue is just humbug and nonsense.
No, I'm
and for a
wondering
lot of people thinking that this is an issue that is sort of being only done for political benefits of the current political dispensation is absolute trash again.
So, if,
Yes, I just
okay,
want
let
the
us
media to
assume.
present this data right.
Yeah, no, let us assume that there is a lot of illegal immigration. Okay, so because if so many people believe it, I don't necessarily think that if so many people believe it, it's true. But let us say, if for the sake of argument, that there is a kernel of truth there, right? That there are people, maybe not 50 lakh, but okay, say 10 lakhs, and maybe it's worrying for many people. Several countries have faced a problem of illegal immigration, about immigration, and it can become trafficking, it can become all kinds of problems. Even if it's not national security, maybe it is a problem of too many people and your resources can't deal with it. But it has only ever been most countries feel like they've only ever solved it by fixing it at the border, by border patrolling. And I say it with a kind of a mixed I say it with mixed feelings that apparently the border, whoever's manning the border, the BSF and whoever else is manning there, either they are extremely compassionate or corrupt, or perhaps incompetent, or any of it. So there have been streams of people, and this I realized when I was writing about the Rohingyas, and I wondered, the route that they followed, because I met them in Jammu, and then the route that they followed was really circuitous, right? Some of them would hit Madras and go there, right? And it was apparently a very fixed route. Some would go to Delhi, some would go to end up in Jammu, but it all happened through the northeast area when they would come from Burma. So this was an understood thing, and I met Rohingyas who said that they spoke to the BSF, and because when they told that their villages were being burnt, this was the compassionate story, that the BSF let them in. But the same BSF then has to try to stop them. They will build the electric fences, which are things that this government says it will do to stop Bangladeshis also. But that I don't see happening, and I don't see that putting hundreds and thousands and lakhs of people through a process which they have no stake in, right? They would not want to be in that process. But if you want to erect fences, you might as well. I'm not again saying, keep all those people out. I don't believe in those. This is a continuing migration, so I don't see how it will stop. When this 1971 cutoff was set during the Assam Accord, that was 1985, so it was 14 years ago. Now it is 50 years. So it is one thing to go and find people who have lived here for some time, and another thing to just stop at least more people from coming in. And I don't see that much talk about that.
So, I'm sorry we're out of time. Thank you so much, Rohini, for this wonderful presentation. And hopefully you'll come back to the BIC and speak on your other work.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ram.